the president of the Supreme Court that is being charged for the organized crime. We have the former special prosecutor for corruption and organized crime again being charged as an organized crime member, together with his colleague from the police who was deputy police director responsible for fighting organized crime. And in separate case we have the former police directors, plural, being also charged for organized crime.
In a lot of international reports, Montenegro is described as a country in which organized crime has a huge role, and there are a lot of organized crime groups that are operating here. Do you think that this information is true, and how many organized crime groups are working in Montenegro?
Absolutely. I mean, even according to our official data, and I'm quoting now the Serious Organized Crime Threat Assessment for 2024, we have officially 11 big organized criminal groups, out of which, and I'm again quoting, vast majority has more than 30 members. However, living in Montenegro and investigating corruption and organized crime for so many years, I have been witnessing, as well as the civil society and media, significant impact of organized crime on the functioning of the country, on literally every change in the country that was made. And as a consequence of that, we now have cases that started revealing to what extent the organized crime was capturing the country. And let me just give you a few examples. We have the president of the Supreme Court that is being charged for the organized crime. We have the former special prosecutor for corruption and organized crime again being charged as an organized crime member, together with his colleague from the police who was deputy police director responsible for fighting organized crime. And in separate case we have the former police directors, plural, being also charged for organized crime, but this one participating in the cigarette smuggling. So all those things, although not yet terminated by the final verdicts of the court, point out what we already know, and that is that the organized crime was capturing Montenegro for at least 2 decades. And it had significant impact on all decisions on a political level that were being made.
What were the main activities of these groups that you are saying that they were operating in Montenegro?
First of all, it was cigarette smuggling. This is something that was, I would say, reinvented by Montenegro from old Yugoslav wars, when we had former big Yugoslavia, where basically Montenegro only source of income in that time when we were under sanctions and embargo was cigarette smuggling. So it was a state job technically, and they didn't call it cigarette smuggling, they called it transit. Of course, although that job was established and initiated by our intelligence at that time, not many time passed until the private sector, let's call it like that, took over the business, and people were starting making hundreds of millions through that stream of operation, and cigarette smuggling didn't end up until very today. Again, in SOCTA for 2024, it is recognized as one of the most common organized crime activities in Montenegro. Besides that, we had, and I believe still have, very active cocaine smuggling, because 2 of the most lethal organized crime groups, Kavači and Škaljari, are both originating from Montenegro, and once were one criminal syndicate. They are, I would say, one of the most brutal criminal gangs in the wider Europe, and they are very actively were using Montenegro as not only as a transit, but also as a hub of operations from which the cocaine was smuggled not only in the region, but also was funneling towards the Western Europe.
Are there any data how much money do these groups earn, and where are they laundering it?
Well, of course not, because the country and all the public authorities are avoiding to give any estimate of funds. But what I can tell you is, through many years of research and many official and unofficial intelligence and other reports we faced with, we are talking about definitely billions of euros over the course of, let's say, at least last 10 years. So we are talking about way more money than the annual state budget of Montenegro is. And this is a special problem for a country of this size, because when organized crime groups are so financially potent, they can influence any or every decision made in the country without any problem. And this is proving to be the case. Through Sky communication that were published, and I believe Montenegro was one of the most active countries with regard to that phenomena, we have been able to read that organized crime leaders, especially the leader of Kavachi, organized crime group that was closely tied to the country and to the state officials, who were actually working for him instead of working for public interest. He was in many times actually commenting politics and pointing out what should be done in the political sphere in order to ensure that, for example, previous regime doesn't lose the power, because we are talking about recordings that come from the period when Montenegro faced significant political change in 2020, when the DPS lost 30 years of ruling the country and the new forces came into power. So absolutely huge amount of money for Montenegrin conditions, which allowed them to penetrate each and every institution, individual or system that they wanted.
And the final result, state capture?
Absolutely, and it was recognized by European Union, not only European Union, in a number of international reports, from Freedom House to Transparency International. Montenegro was often referred as a state captured. We have been getting for more than the last 10 years very strict, I would say, inputs from those international organizations and foreign governments that we have to provide a solid track record of cases in fighting corruption and organized crime, especially high-level one, meaning those on top official positions connected to the organized crime structures, for which until 2020 the state was simply denying it's happening. When the new special prosecutor was appointed, and I'm talking about Special Prosecutor Novovic, he actually had the courage to open those cases and to start investigating real threats that are coming from the organized crime, former corrupt political structures, and their interplay that was happening for years.
These organized crime groups, they also had a cooperation with Albanian organized crime groups from Kosovo. These smuggling routes of cigarettes, they were also crossing Kosovo. Is there any data that these organized crime groups had cooperation with Kosovo organized crime groups?
Yes, we have official confirmation of such cooperation in the SOCTA 2024. This is the latest document that was published. According to that document, on a cigarette smuggling route, it's actually the cigarettes come from either predominantly port of Dures through Montenegro and then go through Kosovo, and it is distributed further on. So it is the clear link between organized crime in Montenegro and Kosovo is visible from that report. Although they did not disclose what amounts we are talking about, they didn't disclose how big those groups are, and most importantly, they didn't disclose what are the efforts to suppress activities of these groups. What we also have been able to learn from a number of international reports is that Montenegrin and Kosovars are also cooperating heavily on a cocaine smuggling. But again, there is no official data that we can call and that we can use actually to make pressure on public authorities to try to reduce the cocaine and cigarette smuggling, which I believe are two most lethal organized crime types in Montenegro. I'm not mentioning, for example, heroin smuggling, because it is mostly happening outside of Montenegro, because this is the other very concerning regional crime route, I would say, but it is mostly avoiding Montenegro, and that was even recognized by SOCTA. So cigarette smuggling and cocaine are something that is linking Montenegro to Kosovo, but also to Serbia and other countries in the region, and where we are jointly making a big problem for the Western Europe, which is being affected either by cocaine or illegal cigarettes that are being placed from these territories.
And if we have this cooperation on these routes, also the money is being shared. So do we have any signal that the money that was earned in Montenegro is being invested in Kosovo in different business?
This is, I would say, the biggest problem. We in Montenegro don't have almost any data about money laundering. If we are talking about, let's say, several hundred millions illegal money made per year, I would just quote you the official EU progress report on Montenegro from 2024, where they say that the year before, Montenegro in total had cases before the prosecution and courts regarding money laundering that were worth somewhere a bit more than 8 million. So we are talking about probably 1% or 2% of those funds that are being investigated by or brought up to some higher level by the authorities. So vast majority of that money obviously remains in free flow, not suppressed anyhow by public authorities, and is probably very freely used both in Montenegro and in Kosovo, but maybe and probably even in some other countries. We even had cases that were discovered in Montenegro that some of our local investors that are in public being brought very closely and even by the prosecution to the cigarette smuggling, and that are officially in the construction business, that they have investment activities, very recent ones, for example, in the Caribbean. But they are by default choosing, I would say, countries and areas where it is way easier to penetrate with the laundered money than, for example, some developed countries where they will have to justify the source of their wealth.
So can this money that was earned in Montenegro being invested in construction and also in other business in Kosovo?
Absolutely. Just like in Montenegro, the only thing is we do not have data, so it's very hard to claim it is being invested. What we can see in Montenegro, that one company that is closely mentioned publicly regarding cigarette smuggling, that is the largest construction company in Montenegro, has been involved into hundreds million worth projects in this country, including the highway construction, and they are building all over the country. So we are talking about assets worth hundreds of millions of euros, and even according to some, for example, Forbes estimate and some analysis done by regional media, owner of that group is being considered as the richest, officially richest Montenegrin person, and they are just taking into consideration money that is being earned through the construction company and not everything else that is mentioned in public. The thing is, we can see that it's happening a lot. I would say expansion of construction is happening in Montenegro, and that is probably the most attractive area that would, I would say, being used for money laundering, and that is negatively affecting citizens of Montenegro, unfortunately.
You're describing that Montenegro was a paradise to launder the money.
Absolutely.
Are there evidence that also foreign money that was created from other organized crime groups, from international, maybe from Europe, from England, from Germany, from Russia, they were laundered here and they created?
Absolutely. We had years of, I would say, a golden era for Russian investment that were coming in Montenegro without any checks. So they could easily bring money to our country without properly investigating that. And there were many investigations at that time by the civil society and media published that were directly linking that Russian money flow with at least dirty activities, if not very particular crimes committed. The thing is, unfortunately, the country decided that its most important thing is to bring the money in the country in order to develop, rather than paying attention who our partners should be and to make sure that we are bringing into the country reputable companies from the West. And unfortunately, as a result, we had one boom, I would say, in the late 2000s in Montenegro, where prices in real estate skyrocketed because of such Russian flow of huge amounts of money, and they were buying literally everything in the country. And the problem with that is that for the first time people were able, to sell the flat or whatever, especially in the coast of Montenegro, for a much higher prices than they were at this moment, the market prices. And in such conditions, unfortunately, people don't think about big picture and what will be the consequence. They are simply happy that they have sold something for way more money than they believed is worth. And in such flood of Russian investment, we had doubled or even tripled prices in the coast per square meter. We had significant jump in the average expenses of living in the country. And unfortunately, we had a lot of bad Russian deals that even BIRN Montenegro and myself personally investigated, where we had, for example, paid as citizens from the budget hundreds of millions just for the lost and fallen bank guarantees for the Russian investments in, for example, industry and in aluminum processing. So it is obvious, and it was obviously very harmful for Montenegro, the way that investment cycle was conducted. And unfortunately, many years later, we are having the repetition of such process. Because when the Russian aggression on Ukraine started, Montenegro was basically allowing Ukrainians, but also Russians to come to Montenegro. And according to the available data, everyone was allowed to bring 100,000 without checking the source of income. So I'll have to remind you that we are probably the biggest importer of victims of the war, because almost 20% of our population increase happened when people from Ukraine and Russia came. And in that sense, we again faced with significant jump of the prices of the rent, of the prices per square meter, significant increase of prices of consumer goods and everything else that is needed in the country, simply because you had heavy demand and you again had a lot of money that came into the country and that again was not properly controlled.
And people believe that this will develop the economy. This will create more jobs for the people and increase the standards of the living for normal peoples. Is this true, or it is?
You cannot unfortunately convince people to look 3 steps ahead. And many of them were happy when the money was coming, but I wouldn't say that they are happy now when basically with the average salary, and I'm talking about every normal individual that is working 9-to-5 job and getting some kind of an average or decent salary, this person cannot claim that he or she lives better now than they used to live, let's say, a few years ago. Because although you nominally get more money every month, the prices were so increased that you simply cannot buy the same amount of goods and services you used to buy 2 or 3 years ago. Of course, it's not only related to the organized crime or huge income of I would say residents from Russia and Ukraine and even some other countries. There is also some populistic financial and fiscal decisions made by our own government, but simply it's always a combination. So unfortunately, the greed of Montenegrin governments, and I'm saying again plural because it's happening from early ages of the DPS until very recent moments, their greed for the money without the need to check the background of the money that is coming has caused us, I would say, way more problems and troubles than good, because we have lost, starting from early Yugoslavia, we have lost basically all factories and industrial production. I'm not saying that in 2025 it will be competitive on a global market, but we lost it in early 90s. So we are now an economy that predominantly focuses on tourism and earns the income from the tourism. So we are depending on the weather, basically, if it's going to be okay and the season will be better than the previous one, and of a heavily heated real estate market, which I believe still doesn't respond to the question why we still have thousands of empty flats in Montenegro, especially in Podgorica and in some coastal areas, which nobody lives in, which is not or are not rented via different global or local agencies that provide short-term accommodation. So basically, all of them are sitting empty. And it is the question why somebody needs empty flats that are of no use unless it is for laundering money.
So was this also creating an area or an environment that local businessmen, people that were trying to do normal business in Montenegro, they were enforced to bankrupt? Because if you have your competitive has a lot of income from dirty money, you will be bankrupt.
We didn't have such analysis, unfortunately, done by the Chamber of Commerce, Association of Employers, or different other associations that gather business. Why? I believe because they were afraid, and they are still afraid from the most prominent organized crime figures. What we have been able to witness in practice is that maybe not all the companies went bankrupt, but we had another thing. There were some construction companies that were competing on a market, especially using the public procurement law. Then a big player comes. Nobody really knows, or at least nobody officially knows, how the money was generated, and simply in the period of 1, 2, or 3 years become the biggest player on the market. So has brand new machines, the most efficient technique, and it simply starts, ripping off the competition. And according, for example, to the law on public procurement, you need to have previous track record in order to apply for the new jobs. And if that company simply eliminates competition one by one, then the vast majority of the market is legally belonging to that company, because it will be the only one having reference to apply for every job. So they either had subtle methods to influence the market and to actually, I would say, reduce the competition. And the big problem is, again, the country and the public authorities that were simply not investigating how the initial capital came and what were connections with possible, I would again say possible because we don't have verdicts, dirty money or money that came from the organized crime or any other illegal activities.
If you talk with normal people, they will tell you that creating an environment that is allowing money laundering in the Balkan region will allow us to develop this country. Is this true, or actually are we damaging our future with this decision to allow people to launder money in our country?
Absolutely. While I wouldn't say that all people would definitely claim that, but some of them will.
But if you talk with normal people, they will say, okay,
yeah,
if
they
you
don't
go to
care.
Albanian, they are making good.
They don't care about the origin of the money.
Yeah.
It simply get us more money, and this is how that stupid policy of the Montenegrin governments actually where it brought us, because it was the same. Just bring the money. We don't care the origin or how somebody earned it. The problem is you are pushing out big prominent investors who want to work in the culture of where they have judicial protection, where not the entire head of law enforcement and judiciary is working for the organized crime, and where you have a system where basically if you follow the law, you will not be denied of any good and service you are entitled to. And it's like basic of the business. The problem with such investments and investors that they are bringing from with the organized crime background, who are basically bullies in the business system, and who are using the dirty money to penetrate the market, is the fact that you will have withdrawal or even not entering at all to the market of prominent players, which we all need in order to develop sustainably. Because just like I have mentioned to you, there is no much benefit for Montenegro that we had 20% of new population that came from Russia and Ukraine bringing a lot of money, because at some point they will go somewhere else or they will spend the money. So this increase of the GDP and all those statistical things that our government is playing off, it will start to fade. So you will get back to normal life, where the prices will be increased, where the cost of living will be increased, where your rent or credit mortgage for your flat will be increased, and you won't have the money. So you will live way worse than you used to if something doesn't change. So this is unfortunately why such model development based on dirty money, based on corruption and organized crime is not good on the long run, and it will undermine the future of, I believe, both Kosovo, Montenegro, but all other neighboring countries to live in a way more prosperous manner we should be living, in which I believe we are entitled to, but unfortunately our politicians always try to find ways to prevent us from doing it.
We are talking about billions of money that were laundered in the Balkan area, and we have just a few cases that were investigated. Do you see that rule of law institutions, they have the will to start dealing with these problems, to start confiscating the assets, to start serious investigations in the whole region? We have Kosovo, and we have just a few cases. We have Montenegro with few cases. We have Albania with a few cases, not with huge amount of cases.
I wouldn't say we are smartest in the world, but I would say that if we, and now I'm talking as a region, if we really have this big problem of the organized crime, we could always establish, some regional law enforcement authority that would be handling this, and that would be way harder to penetrate than our local law enforcement agencies. If you have the fact that the vast majority of leaders of Montenegrin courts, prosecution, and police were working for the organized crime groups, how do you expect any outcome? I'm not stating, because I don't have that level of information, that it's same in Kosovo, Albania, Serbia, or whatever. But I would definitely say that not a single country in the region had some or has some results that would serve them to be proud. I would say we still are operating all in the level of statistical error, because if you are talking about 8 million of laundered money in 2023 of cases, that's ridiculous. Because that very year we had at least 700 million, if not a billion, of money from cocaine smuggling, cigarette smuggling, and potentially some smaller amounts from marijuana, arms, human trafficking, and everything else that is happening, and simply nothing. So I would say that our institution lacks significant political will as a whole, as a region, to deal with organized crime and to cut those ties. Because if we did everything we could, for example, Montenegro and Kosovo, to cut all the border possibilities to transfer the things, if we did it with Serbia, if we did it with Albania, or if Albania did it with North Macedonia, it would be way harder to operate the business. The thing is, in the entire Western Balkans, unfortunately, our organized crime structures work together way better and love themselves way more than, for example, political structures do at the same time. And this is why they are more powerful than our official structures.